Hi, my name is Jose Bahamonde. This is my crowd. Ronnie, Randy, I'm going to give a brief history of the game of baseball. Okay? Baseball, no one really knows exactly where it started or what game it really derives from. The game that most people think is most similar to baseball is a game called Rounders. Rounders was played in England and was brought to the United States through immigration pretty much. During the 1800s, baseball here in the United States had a lot of different names. They would call it goal ball, they called it ball, base, they called it, many names. The game of baseball, the way we know it today, pretty much got that name because people started to organize. Country clubs started making their own teams from their members and playing against other country clubs. And then eventually, mid-1800s, you started having professional teams. Started having professional teams that played in different leagues, in their own regions of the country. During this time, teams that are still around today, like the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Chicago Cubs, a lot of these teams were around in the 1800s, but until the formation of Major League Baseball, they didn't play together. Okay? During the late 1800s is when we started seeing a lot of these leagues, a lot of teams that played in these separate leagues came together and pretty much formed what we know today as the majors. Early 1900s, historically, is what we call the dead ball era. They call it the dead ball era because the ball itself wasn't sewn tight enough for the ball to really travel far when it was hit. And bats weren't as good as they are today because of technology and things like that. So in this time, you might have just a handful of guys that can actually hit a home run. Games were very low scoring, and fields themselves had to be a lot smaller. That's what they called the inside game. Back then, that's the style that they played. A lot more bunts, stolen bases, things like that. Because not only was there not that much athleticism, pitchers didn't pitch as fast. So even though the ball wasn't as good and the bats weren't as good, the balls weren't coming as fast, so they were even harder to hit out of the park. Which is why people consider Babe Ruth to be the best baseball player of all time. Because Babe Ruth hit over 600 home runs in a time where he could be the only guy on his team that actually hits a home run. And his records have only been broken by like 2 or 3 guys in modern times. And they've lasted over 80 years. In this time, baseball was segregated. So from that era, you won't see many African American players in the Hall of Fame. But they formed their own league. They formed what we know as the Negro Leagues. In the Negro Leagues, a guy could be just as good as Babe Ruth, and we would have never really heard about him because he never played in a big stadium with a big crowd. It's not that it was illegal for black players to play. It's just that fans didn't want to root for a black player. This is a time of a lot of racial turmoil, and they didn't want to see someone doing better than Babe Ruth. They didn't want to see someone hitting against the best pitcher, the best white pitcher. Jackie Robinson was the first African American player to make it to the major leagues, but he got life threats, he got things thrown at him, he got spit at. He didn't have any press conferences, but he opened the doors for players like Hank Aaron, who would go on and break Babe Ruth's record for most home runs ever, Barry Bonds, who broke Hank Aaron's record, Willie Mays, all of these guys who were great in the mid-1900s, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, got their start because of Jackie Robinson. Baseball today baseball is eventually going to have to change. And it's because baseball today, the athletes are a lot more physically gifted. you have guys like Alex Rodriguez, Albert Pujols, who are on pace to break records that have not been broken in decades and decades and decades. So as athletes become more gifted, more talented, they have more resources, you know, better nutrition, baseball's eventually going to have to either make the fields bigger, somehow make the bats more like they used to be, and be stricter on performance enhancing drugs. Because nowadays, it's my opinion that as far as the 80s, 90s, and today, what we consider the best baseball players of our era are mostly all pitchers. Randy Johnson, Nolan Ryan, Greg Maddux, all of these guys who are of our era, the best players, are all pitchers, and it's because who were supposed to be the best hitters of our time have all gotten tainted because of the steroid era in baseball. Another change that's going to come to baseball soon, I think it's the instant replay. Football has it, basketball has it, we saw in the World Cup, soccer even has it to a certain extent. But too many blown calls by the umpires, and fans are getting less and less tolerant of it. So with time, that's something else that's going to change in the game. But that's a brief history. That's how we got to where we are today. Thank you.